Coming up, the Thursday night football matchup does not involve the New York Giants, and yet there is plenty to talk about as we look at the injury report and what it means for this final stretch of the season. Brian Dable names Justin Pugh the continued starter. Is that a problem for Andrew Makowitz? And ultimately, wins. Is that a thing that Giants fans have a misconception around? And you'll break that down as well coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, the healthy, wealthy, and wise Andrew Makowitz, as we tap into the start of, the edge of, the beginning of Week 16 and all the matchups that matter, including, the Giants. The Giants play the Eagles this weekend, the divisional rivalry we all knew was coming. How we doing, Andy?
It's good, Adam. Listen, just based on the schedule and how things go, we have the Giants on Christmas, right? And it's a tough one for me because you want to tuck in, you get all these presents, you're with the family, you're feeling good, and then you're like, but I still have to kind of watch this game, and the Giants are going to be double digit underdogs. It feels like there's something just hanging over this holiday weekend.
I got to be honest with you. The greatest gift the Giants gave the Giants fan base is not really being involved in the playoff picture anymore, so that you can choose to be not as engaged as you normally would for the Giants Eagle matchup if you so choose. And as we all know, we'll talk about this on our preview show tomorrow, but were the Giants to all of a sudden start to be in that game, yeah, I'm going to have a problem because I'm going to watch it and I'm going to start rooting for them. And we all know the ire that draws from a certain segment, which we will discuss as well. Before we dive in on our full episode and looking at this injury board and why I think it's a fascinating time of year to discuss it, remind you that today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Potential. Visualizing, analyzing, realizing, and actualizing your well-being. Head over to potential.com to learn more. Now, the injuries to me, and there's nothing really groundbreaking here coming into this weekend for the Giants. But the thing that I thought was fascinating from a where the Giants are to what they should be doing is that you may not care about Matt Pert, but he's out and on injured reserve. And this isn't anything that just happened. You know that Gary Brightwell is out, and he's probably not going to be a part of this team going forward. Randy Bullock, questionable, could still make it back. The little bowling ball that kicks could still make it back for this team. But when I think about Joshua Zudu, Shane Lemieux, Wyatt Davis, Aaron Robinson, who we've been a fan of but hasn't been able to be healthy for this team, Bryce Ford Wheaton, and even Hassanauer, the center, like there's a collection of young players that ideally you'd like to get reps and sample size on down the stretch of a lost season, and they won't get that. So this evaluation process we always talk about continues to get pushed a little bit further. Not all these guys matter, but certainly a handful of them do. And we're not going to get to see them play and know, at least in some sense, whether or not we have 30 spots to fill or 36 spots to fill on this roster in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, on top of that, Adam, it just goes to depth. You can see that there are other teams in the league, like, for instance, the Cleveland Browns, who had an awesome offensive line. Then all of a sudden they have debilitating injuries and they're pulling guys off the street, and they're still a cohesive unit because they did have depth at some of these positions.
Of
The
course,
second that Andrew Thomas goes out, this offensive line crumbles, literally crumbles. And it feels like it's a razor thin margin for the Giants because some of these depth pieces, we just don't know if they're reliable. And so, to your point, like, we'd like to see more Matt Pert just to know if we can once and for all say what it's going to be. We need to see more Joshua Zudu so that we know what he's going to be. We didn't even mention Marcus McKeithen. Like, we need to see some of these players to understand, are they complementary depth pieces, or are they just filling a roster spot until we turn more of this roster over next season?
by the way, a guy like Darian Beavers, who's down on the practice squad and has been dealing with injury, would have loved to have been able to see him at the back end of this season. And we know, listen, we know that Matt Parrott is not necessarily, even if he was playing, we'd only be saying, of course, he stinks. We don't need him here. But a Bryce Ford Wheaton, I actually zone in on him because we liked him in camp. We thought that maybe this guy had a chance to make the 53-man roster and be a part of this thing. The fact that he's not able to play, knowing what the Giants are going to be going into the offseason and the draft, looking to add probably an elite number one wide receiver to this group, you could be losing other guys too. Like Bryce Ford Wheaton could be filling out the back end of your wide receiver room potentially But again, you have to push back that timeline. And with a lot of these guys, we found that the guys that get injured now get injured again later. And you end up like, Aaron Robinson's the great example of that, right? Oh, well, if only he can, son of a gun, injured again. And at a certain point, it just becomes, well, that's a part of who you are as a player. So that was the one element of this injury update. The other side of it, then turning over to Coach Brian Dable, who's been having some fun, I think, in front of the press in the last few days, because whether it's coming out and naming Tommy DeVito the instant starter and what that means, and not really having a clear response when asked about why are you doing it differently now? Like, why has it changed? It doesn't matter. This is what I'm saying. Also, when he was asked about this week, Justin Pugh, who has been a great story. Guys flipping houses one day, he's blocking for the New York Football Giants the next. And as a player like that, it hasn't looked great. And arguably, this past game against the Saints was his worst performance. Also, is going to continue to be the starter for the New York Football Giants. Were you surprised by that? Because when I hear the fan base demanding Mark Glowinski start, I think we know the season has certainly taken some interesting twists and turns.
So this is an interesting one because I kind of pressed Dable on it, and he was very particular about the words that he used. Like, Justin Pugh, he's the starter? Is he gonna start again? And he said, yeah, he'll play.
He'll
He'll
play.
play
Yeah, that's
was
true. He will
kind of what
continue to
Dable
play. He
said.
didn't say start. He
And
did.
so like he made sure to avoid saying like he's my definitive starter moving forward. And it's fine on Daboll to say that because he should be figuring out what the option is going to be at guard moving forward. Keep this in mind, Adam, and this is something I think about. We know Justin Pugh has struggled a little bit. He was a good story, just coming off the street, as you mentioned before. But you basically have, Justin Pugh, Ben Bredesen, Mark Golinsky, all free agents at the end of the season. Is one of them going to be a depth piece for you next year? And if so, who's the most likely person that it's going to be? I think after Glowinski lost his job, he'll probably go elsewhere to see if maybe there's better opportunities, better coaching, whatever it's going to be for him. I would think that Justin Pugh's kind of said, this is my last go around. Like, I want to just be with the Giants, whether it's just for this year, and next year. So maybe they're looking at it and saying, like, if we give him an extended run and he stays with us in training camp, could he be a depth piece at guard, making the veteran minimum, sticking around with the Giants? That's kind of where I think the Giants' head is at, even though Ben Bredesen is younger and probably has more productive years ahead of him.
Oh, see, I think that the Glowinski, 31 years old, thanks so much. See you later. And he's been better at the second half of the season than he was at the beginning, obviously, because the beginning was a disaster. We know whether it's coaching, whether it's how bad Evan Neal played to start the year. There's a lot of things that probably didn't help Glowinski. And also, he's not going to be back in a part of this team. I can't see that happening, age and otherwise. The Justin Pugh one, to me, if you can keep him around, I think it's totally fine. Understanding you're bringing him back as a depth piece, not as a competing for starter role. Bredesen's the guy that I would keep around because remember, beginning of this season, that's exactly what Bredesen was supposed to be. Your interior offensive line depth, your safety valve. And for the most part, he's been a good, serviceable player. He's been shuffled around, been asked to do different things, and he's only in his mid 20s. So if the price point is right for him, he seems to be the most logical one to retain. And then I think you also can do the both and. We're bringing back Justin Pugh. It's a good story, like you say, veteran minimum. And guess what? If somewhere along training camp next year they say, Justin Pugh will officially be retiring as a New York Football Giant, right? Like you can always pull that trigger when you want to. So those are the two guys that make sense to me, which is why just the final note on this, like I know that Glowinski has played better, but remember, this is the guy that the fan base collectively said is atrocious. It was a terrible signing, which I think no matter what you agree it was based on the money that was allocated to him 2 years ago. He was the one that was the ire of the fan base at the start of the year. Now all of a sudden he's the guy that Justin Pugh shouldn't be sniffing the field for. And I just think that this recency bias is what comes into play. It was an atrocious game for Justin Pugh. I get it. But just prior to that, he was playing serviceable guard for the New York Football Giants, and we were all pleasantly surprised with how he's been since coming off the street, right? So these are the things that I think week to week and game to game, and I fall prey to it too. You start to zone in on the guy that looks the worst and ask, why is he possibly starting? Why isn't it this other player? If you're demanding somebody be inserted, it should be Ben Bredesen and shuffling things the appropriate way. I don't see a need over these last 3 games to necessarily playing Glowinski outside of the fact that you don't have enough bodies to give yourself a 5-man offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. You already know what you've gotten in Glowinski. You don't see him in plans beyond the next 3 games. So like what unless you feel like you need to see something from other players or someone is a liability, like he doesn't get back in. And the last thing I'll say on player development, The Giants really do need to figure this out because Andrew Thomas is the only one that has looked better since he became a Giant, as opposed to previously with other teams or in college or anywhere else. Like John Michael Schmitz was supposed to be a home run. He's had a mixed bag so far this year at center. Evan Neal was the can't miss prospect at right tackle. He
Yeah.
has struggled mightily. And you look at Matt Pert, you look at Azudu, you look at McKeithen, all these guys that are supposed to be depth pieces have not really shown up or had any consistency whatsoever, Adam. So when we think about how different this offensive line is going to look, the Giants are going to draft more offensive linemen. We know that. They're going to try to go out and get at least one or two veterans to be able to shore this up. But like they have to figure it out because half of the offensive linemen that are on the roster right now will not be there next season. And a lot of it has to do with some of the development that they've had.
Oh, of course. And coming up here in just 1 second, we'll take a look just over on the defensive side of the ball, a handful of names that I think are worth watching over the final 3 weeks of the season as well. And then we'll get into this big posed question from Andrew Makowitz around winning football games, specifically 3 football games, and whether or not the Giants made a mistake. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. Personam is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms simply can't. Personam is always vigilant and always learning. Go over to personam.com now to learn more. Now, when we turn our attention, just real quick here, before we talk about these wins, Andy, and the ire of your life right now. On the defensive side, I just want to make a note because in these last couple of games, one player that's jumped out to me, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, has been Cordell Flott. And if we just think about young players that are healthy enough to be playing right now for the Giants, he's a guy that I look at and circle and double underline here because you need to know inside of this secondary, Adoree Jackson's not going to be here. We know Deonte Banks is playing really good ball. We know that we lost our 6th-round darling who wasn't able to perform out of the starting rotation. Maybe he's going to get another look here along the way. But Cordell Flott is a pretty important piece here because if he's going to play in the slot, if he's going to be a versatile weapon for this defense, great. If not, then outside of your safeties and the big question around an Xavier McKinney, we're backing up here and saying we have 2 players in our secondary that like we are very confident about and just 4 holes to fill. Like that's a lot. And there's a bigger question here that we won't talk about today, maybe next week. But I secretly do feel like we may be overvaluing how good this defense was relative to the football that they've had to play in recent weeks. So there's a lot of questions here, and there's certainly some players to watch on that side.
Yeah, it's been tough knowing that Trey Hawkins was so good in preseason. We thought we may have, gotten lucky,
Stolen
hit
something.
a
Yeah.
home run, diamond in the rough, and now he has been relegated to the bench for the majority of the season. Can't get himself on the field.
And he
That's
should
been a
be playing,
challenge.
by the way. I know he's a 6th-rounder, so there's a little bit of debate. This isn't a first, second, third, even 4th-rounder, but he should be getting reps here, unless you're kind of saying the development is a lot further out than we think.
Well, I was just looking on Twitter. Still have to fact check it, but Gridiron Media put out that basically Trey Hawkins has given up the highest passer rating in the entire league at the cornerback position. And
Sure.
like, yes, that's part of the bumps in the learning curves. While the Giants are still technically mathematically alive, I think there's a missive to say put the best players on the field. We'll worry about development later. But yes, he needs some of these valuable reps towards the end of the season, Adam, clearly, because you don't know what you're going to have. You talked about Adoree Jackson moving on. You know you have Deonte Banks. Can Cordell Flott play the other cornerback spot? Is
Right.
Darnay Holmes going to be around? Is Aaron Robinson ever going to come back? There are so many question marks around Deonte Banks when you fast forward even 6 months from now. Like you theoretically could only have Deonte Banks. You don't know what's going to happen with Xavier McKinney's contract. There are so many holes in the secondary
Dane
that
Belton.
you all of a
Yeah.
sudden look at it and say 6 months from now, it could be a drastically different situation that Joe Shane needs to address.
And by the way, even with the guys say like Trey Hawkins, again, 6th-round pick. But okay, let's say I don't know how many there are. Let's say there's 300 corners in the league, and he had the worst passer rating against, right? Okay, over the last 3 weeks, just isolated in those 3 weeks, can he be the 270th worst cornerback? You know what I mean? Like if you can show that, then that would be there's been some progress here while he's learning in the background. So just an extra footnote, something that we'll obviously continue to talk about over the back end of this season. Now, Andy, 3 wins. 3 wins for Tommy DeVito and the New York Football Giants, and a bit of a journey that we all were happy to ride upon. But not every Giants fan loved the fact that they won these games, and they now reflect back on it and saying these were the most disastrous games you ever could have won.
Okay, so I've been seeing it a lot where some people are taking victory laps where they were like 2-8, we need to tank, we need to lose every single game to get the highest draft pick possible. Then a
Sure.
funny thing happened on the way to the number one pick. Basically, Tommy DeVito entered the scene, helped the team win 3 games, really on the strength of the defense helping to win those games.
Hmm.
And once the Giants get eliminated after the Saints game, for all intents and purposes, from playoff contention, a lot of people go back to those tweets when they were at 2-8 saying, I told you so. What was the point of winning those 3 games? We should never have won those 3 games. And Adam, my question on all of this is, who are you mad at? Like, when you think about winning those 3 games, who are you mad at? Are you mad at the players for playing hard
Right.
and trying to like make sure that they have a job? Are you mad at the coaches that are coaching to win games when we know like win-loss records and bonuses and contracts are there? Or are you mad at the front office for trying to keep the team in playoff contention so that like they could sell tickets and make like money and do like who are people mad at is my real question to you.
Yeah, and I think, I'll start with the front office one because that's a part of it. Selling something, right? Trying to sell the fan base that it's worth coming to the games, it's worth watching this team play, and they can win some football games, right? Because otherwise, I hate to break it to you guys, it's a money-making business. And whether or not you think that most fans will still go to the games, season ticket holders, even when they're bad, but if you lose 20% of filling your stadium because you're no longer even remotely interesting, that hurts the bottom line. So you are trying to sell that. You want to go down to the coaching staff. Listen, we know which coaches we think have been real problems for this team. We know that we expect changes to come. But if you don't win these 3 football games, what's the other conversation you're having? Right, wrong, indifferent. You're talking about Brian Dable because you don't go through a second season and go what 2-15 and say, yeah, but Brian Dable is still the right head coach for this team. You're not doing that. So if you believe in Brian Dable, you needed him to win some of these games, and then go down to the players, whether it's the guys that are playing for contracts in their next team and they want to put good stuff on tape. So you can't coach the competitive nature out of them. But even the idea of starting Tommy DeVito, remember, who's the better quarterback? Who gives you a better chance to win? Many would say it should have been Tyrod Taylor. So in some regards, Brian Dable did the both and. We want to compete, we want to try to win games, and maybe secretly, we're okay to lose these.
Adam, the Tommy DeVito piece is actually pretty interesting to me because it's also like, what did you want the coaches to do? They started an undrafted practice squad quarterback, and a
That's right.
funny thing happened on the Giants winning games, boosting morale in the locker room. Also, it might seem small to many people, but like, do people want to come to a dysfunctional organization that finishes 2-15 in free agency? I don't know. It's one of those things to keep your in the back of your mind. Money always talks, but if you're like, I don't want to go to that dumpster fire, that's also another piece of this too.
Well, by the way, too, my other thing about this is like I know they win these games, and at this time of the year, you look at them differently than you look at the beginning of the year. If you want to be upset, like be upset that they came back against Arizona, right? Like because again, at the time, well, that made them 1-1, and it meant something different. Okay, then they lost 4 straight games, and then be upset that they beat Washington. Because if you hadn't won one of those 2 games, then by the time you got to the Washington game that DeVito plays in, and they get that win, the third win of the season, you'd also be thinking about it all differently. Like everything would have been relative. And if you don't win the early season games, guess what? You probably make different decisions at the trade deadline. It probably influences you to move more players than just Leonard Williams. So, like, the timing of these things always matters. Like, oh, this 3-game winning streak now. Look, okay, fine. The high level thing I think that really is at the core of this, and I wonder if you agree, is that when because I mentioned the Cardinals, the Washington Commanders twice, and the New England Patriots. You throw in Green Bay, who maybe isn't going to look as sexy as it did at the time that we got the win a couple of weeks ago. I think the reality here is this is the fan base being vocal about we're way worse than the 5 wins. Like we should be maybe a 2-win team based on talent, based on competition we've gone against. And that part of it I can hear. Just the idea that don't look back, and I don't think you or I will, and say, well, if only, because this is what another segment of the fan base did. Well, if you look back at the schedule, that Jets game, 99% chance to win, then you lost it. Think about the Buffalo game. Oh, if only Tyrod Taylor doesn't mess up down at the goal line. Like, you can say that, but guess what? At the end of the year, if this team has 5 wins or has 7 wins, you're still going to look at them as being a highly flawed team that has coaching issues, that has personnel issues, and needs to make a lot of changes. And I think I think that sometimes fans do live on this winning or losing spectrum. If it was 2 wins, we'd know so much better if they're good or bad. If it was 7 wins, we'd know. I know what this team is for the most part. And it really doesn't matter how many games they win or lose, understanding what it impacts from a draft standpoint in the offseason.
Yeah, of course, you want the number 1 or number 2 pick. The problem is the Giants are better than the Washington Commanders. They played them twice, they beat them twice. They're just a
Right.
better team.
Right.
They're better than the Patriots. They are. The Patriots are a tire fire. If the Panthers played the Giants right now, the Giants would be favored. The likelihood would be that the Giants would beat them. The whole
Right.
point is like the Giants are better than those bottom 3 or 4 teams. They're just not better than teams that are making the playoffs. And that's a tough place to be. It makes people look back and get angry. To me, it's like, look, the last 3 wins were really good for everyone, I think. I think everybody in the Giants fan base, even if they don't want to admit it, needed to see some kind of enjoyment out of these games. And listen, like that's at the end of the day, that's just what you want as a fan. Like you can't take away those wins and me fist pumping. You just can't do it.
And by the way, the Giants are currently picking 6th in the draft right now. And depending on how things shake out, they could maybe get over Chicago and be top 5. So even with these wins, they'll still be in a position if you believe it's quarterback time and you believe it's such a great draft class. Then guess what? And a lot of people feel this way. First 2 quarterbacks go off the board, take the 3rd quarterback there. Whatever it is, like you have to take a quarterback. We'll talk about that in the offseason, but you'll be there to do it. There's more than enough quarterbacks for where you're probably going to be drafting to still get somebody in the end. All right. Let's close our episode talking about Thursday Night Football tonight and giving our picks around an interesting game where you and I disagree about what should be the case. The New Orleans Saints are traveling to the LA Rams. The Giants will still play these LA Rams. The Rams are -4.5 over on FanDuel. Over under is 46.5. Expect some points to get scored here. And if you want to take the money line, the Saints, obviously a powerhouse here coming off that Giants win, plus 166 on the money line. What, not even about your pick yet, but what do you believe is the outcome that Giants fans should all be rooting for? That little, just microscopic, sick segment of this fan base that says mathematically we're still in this thing.
I know, and this is one of the Adam's banes of his existence is like, just be
Yes.
realistic about this team. They stink. They aren't making the playoffs.
Yes.
However, they are not
Yes.
mathematically eliminated yet. So if
Sick.
you're a part of a small subset of a smaller subset of a fraction of the fan base that still has playoff aspirations and is
Which
still
might be
thinking,
Andy. Andy might be in this. We don't know for sure. There's some sneaking world where Andy is actually El Presidente of this fan club. I don't know for sure. I don't know.
I'm just a guy that, like, until you are physically eliminated, like, you cannot just ignore the fact that there are still benefits to teams winning or losing. In
There's
my
nothing
humble
better
opinion,
to I'm just a guy. Let me explain it to you. I'm just a guy. So, by your premise, though, and for that sick little freak section of the fan base of which you are a part of, the result obviously should then be
the Giants would ultimately want the Rams to win because the Giants still have an upcoming game against the Rams to be able to get the head to head against the LA Rams. Now, again, that is the 0.01% chance that the Giants would have. But in a vacuum, if you're still holding out hope for the rest of this season, the one thing that you would be cheering for is having the Rams win. But it sounds like you feel differently about this one.
why I guess really the reason why I'm saying you want the Rams to win this game, the Saints to lose, because why? Maybe I just want the hope to die. I want this to stop. Rams beat the Saints. The Saints, the Rams get to 8 wins and it's over. Like, and we can just stop doing this. But that's really all it is. I was gonna do this whole thing, the draft order and the losses and the whatever. It's just I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to have some microscopic section that says, oh, this team could, if only. It doesn't matter. Rams win. They're the better team. They're going to win this game. I'm going to take the Rams. I'm going to lay the 4.5. And guess what? The only reason why you would want the Saints to win is to make yourself feel better about that loss that you had to them a week ago. Well, the Saints, they're a playoff team. That's why that loss. And no, you're going to find out just how bad the Saints team actually is. Because even with a really good defense, Matthew Stafford, the Rams, they're going to beat up the Saints. And we're going to look back and go, not only did we lose to the Saints, but we lost to a Saints team that is far more a paper tiger than they are a playoff team.
My favorite piece of all of this, Adam, my favorite piece before we give our final prediction on Thursday night is it's going to make me so happy talking to you over the next couple of days across the holiday because even if the Saints win and they get to 8 wins, it doesn't automatically eliminate the Giants yet. The Giants will still be alive technically in the playoff machine. And so you'll have to listen to everyone say, like, well, if they beat the Eagles and then 4 other teams tie it 8 and
That's right.
9 along with the Giants could get the strength of schedule if something happens in Jacksonville in 3 weeks. Like, that makes me so happy that you will have to listen to all of these crazy, ridiculous scenarios, at least until the Giants play on Christmas against the Eagles.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, as far as I could go was the game against the Saints. That's as far as this journey could go for me in the playoff aspirations for the New York Football Giants. Who are you taking in this one officially on Thursday night? And do you have a little play for anybody over on FanDuel?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm taking the Rams. The Rams are hot. I didn't see much.
After
I think
all that, yeah, obviously I'm taking the Rams.
no, I mean the Rams are just a better team in
Yeah,
my opinion over the Saints. The Saints haven't really done well against teams over 500 as we mentioned before. While the Rams are 7-7, they have played competitive football against really good teams. The addition of Kyron Williams at running back for them has been awesome.
yeah.
Matt Stafford has been playing at a very, very high level. With all these quarterback injuries, Matt Stafford is playing at a top 5 quarterback level right now. I don't think Derek Carr is playing at that level. I see him as trying to manage things like he did against the Giants. To me, I have the Rams. I have them winning this convincingly. I think this is a game where the Saints get completely exposed, especially in the run game. So I'm gonna take the Rams by 2 touchdowns in this game. I
Whoa.
think it's going to be an absolute blowout. Look at Kyron Williams over 89 yards rushing. It may seem like a simple bet, but when he started, he's had over 95 yards rushing, and the Saints defense is not good at stopping the run. So for me, look at Kyron Williams over rushing yards. They're going to run the football. I think that this could be over by the second quarter.
When we look at this number here, just because Andy said by 2 touchdowns, right? 2 touchdowns. So let's do the little dance on the parlay. You know how we like to do it. Let's have those LA Rams. Let's make them let's be a little bit safe here. Let's say they just lay 13 and a half, not the full 14. You go ahead and you punch that up there, and then you add in a Williams over 80 yards to this mix. And then you got to get there somehow. How about 25 plus receiving yards for Alvin Kamara for the Saints? That's plus 606, my friends, over on FanDuel. So you can make some money there. And maybe you even go seismic, go the full 14, because that's going to move the needle there if you're willing to commit that and end up having what will ultimately be a push, and then you'll be absolutely miserable. But bottom line is I agree with you, man. Rams, whatever they are not going to be, Super Bowl contenders, they still are a team filled with a ton of veteran talent. Matthew Stafford, front and center, the most of it. And how ironic is it, man, in a season with so many injuries to quarterbacks and seeing games where Matthew Stafford has looked like he is 100% injured and not coming back, he just keeps getting himself up. Like, he has taken some real licks this year and still been at the helm. They're going to be a playoff team to me. That is that wild card team when we look inside of that picture. And it's going to be really fun just to see somebody have to play that team wild card weekend. And just know there's pedigree. There's championship pedigree all across that roster. Someone's going to be disgusted having to play them in a wild card weekend when this season is all wrapped up. Bottom line is, though, guys, we still have a lot of players to watch for the New York Football Giants in this matchup against the Eagles. The Eagles are bad now. They don't win football games. They lost to the Seahawks. So we'll get into all that on our Friday edition. We'll talk about the spread. We'll talk about player props. And again, developmentally, who are a handful of players that we want to take a look at? And can Tommy DeVito bounce back? That'll be on our Friday show. It's why you get over to YouTube at One Giant Podcast. It's why you get over to Twitter and you look at AndyMac214. You look at Adam Armbrecht and you look at One Giant Podcast on the podcast feed, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.